I want to thank you all for coming. My name is David Arieti, and I've been here for over 30 years at this college, and I teach biology, mainly at the Skokie campus. And one of my fields is environmental science, and I've been in this field for, I don't know, 30, 40 years. So I'm obviously trying to save the planet, and now, as you can all imagine, it's been coming under threat. So I try to talk about it, and I also wrote 2 books about it that I will allude to later. So anyway, today what I want to do is talk to you about something that's very important, how biodiversity inoculates against extinction. However, before I begin that, I want to show you something that was in the news lately and that I don't think most people know about. I want to discuss first, before I begin, this woman. Now, what does this have to do with what we're talking about today? Well, you'll find out in a minute. Does anybody know who this woman is? Okay. Let me show you what she did. It's a special woman, has to do with the environment. She was born in 1890, died in 1998, which means she lived 108 years. So she must have been doing something right. She was a writer. She wanted women's suffrage and worked for civil rights movement. She was a charter member of the American Civil Liberties Union. In 1993, President Bill Clinton awarded her the Presidential Medal of Freedom. In 1999, she was inducted into the National Wildlife Federation Hall of Fame. In 2000, she was inducted into the National Women's Hall of Fame. One of her main works was preserving the Everglades, a large wetland in southern Florida. Okay, she wrote a great book called The Everglades, Rivers of Grass. Here comes her name. Now, everybody in this room know her name, I guarantee it, but for a negative reason, which had nothing to do with her. All right, let me show you. Here's the book, The Everglades, River of Grass, and her name is Marjorie Stoneman Douglas, the same one where they had that tragedy at the school in Florida. So anyway, I just thought I'd mention that. So this lady here has to do a lot with the environment, and I'm sure nobody knew that, did you? Well, now you know it. So I just thought I'd mention it since I did this yesterday too with the other lecture I gave. And so I thought it was important that you know her name and what she did, since I don't think most people knew about it. So when I heard about the school shooting, I did some research, and I found out she was a staunch environmentalist. So she helped the Everglades, and the Everglades is part of the biodiversity that we're going to be talking about today. I mean, it's already, I'm not going to talk specifically about the Everglades, but I'll just mention as a factor involved in biodiversity. So anyway, let me begin this lecture, and this is the outline. We're going to cover what is biodiversity. We're going to talk about the kingdoms of organisms, nature services, and what we mean by nature. Nature does a lot for you, and in 1997 there were about 12 authors that put a price tag on the value of nature services. Now, if you look around this room, everybody has the value. What are you doing? You're breathing air, we hope it's clean, right? You're eating food, you hope it has no pesticides and stuff in it, which that'll be hard to come by. But anyway, you have all sorts of variety of foods. You have a whole bunch of stuff. We keep decomposing organisms, which is good, and that goes back to nature. Well, the 12 scientists put a price on all this, and I'll discuss that in a few minutes. And so we're going to talk about threats to biodiversity, discussion of major kingdoms and how they interact with each other, and understanding relationships. Okay, I want to talk to you first of all. We're talking about biodiversity. Let's figure out what it is. Okay, biodiversity is not only the different types of organisms on the planet, but it goes to 3 things: the genes, species, and ecosystems. All these things are representative of biodiversity. So we know what the word diversity means: different types of organisms, things like this. And this includes virtually everything: plants, fungi, bacteria, protists. We'll talk about that later. Animals. Anyway, the genes are very important, and certain genes encode for basically everything that organisms have in their bodies and the way they react, etc., etc. And some genes actually, because of certain genes, protect us. And I'll go into that possibly later. So that's very important. And then we have species diversity, okay? As of now, there's roughly, based on the last count, 1.8 million known organisms. The majority are insects, and I'll give you a number. I put all the numbers out there in a few moments. But since the majority are insects, that's very important for the planet too. And of course, we have plant species and fungi and animals. Now, the point I'm trying to make is that all these organisms work together, okay? And I'll go into that in a few moments. Then I want to talk to you about an ecosystem. What is an ecosystem? We're talking about that too because we all live in an ecosystem. Up here, we live in a sort of a temperate ecosystem. We have grasslands, we have some trees, things like this. And I want to tell you the definition of an ecosystem, since this is one of the major premises of environmental science. An ecosystem essentially is an area where the living and non-living exist. Now, in this room, everybody in this room, including the bacteria that live on you and in you and all over this room, are considered biotic factors because they're living. So biotic means living. Abiotic means non-living. Obviously, the things you need, what do you need to live on? Oxygen. You need gravity or else you'll be floating around all over the place, right? You need land to sit on, stand on, whatever. That's gravity. You need electromagnetic radiation. Well, you have the lights, right? Without lights, you wouldn't get photosynthesis, you see? You all need light. It also makes vitamin D in your body, right? Okay? And then, of course, you need water. Atmospheric pressure. Well, how come you're able to breathe down here and not 30 kilometers up there? Because you have atmospheric pressure. You all see that? So these are things you take for granted. How come nobody's floating around this room? Because the gravity is holding you down to your seats. You see that? Now, of course, these are things most people don't think about, but nevertheless, that's part of the abiotic factors. There's probably a lot more. I just didn't write all of them down, but I think you get the idea, because everything you're eating there are chemicals, right? Every food you eat, you might not think of it as chemicals, but they're chemicals. Okay? So I just want to make my point about that. Okay? If you still want to write, I'll change it in a minute. Are you still writing? I'll wait. Yeah? Are you all done? Yeah? Yeah? Okay. This time I'll slow up if you want. Now, I want to show you now what are the kingdoms of organisms, okay? I want to point out something too. We're talking about kingdom as if it's set in stone, and it's obviously a classification system, okay? But I want to point out that classification now is in a constant state of flux. That means it's constantly changing. What you see now are 6 kingdoms. I have a book at home that made little plant-like things, the algae, a 7th kingdom. And I bet you 10 years from now we're going to have more kingdoms, okay? These are the main 6 now that we have, but it'll probably be maybe 10, 20 in the future, okay? Why am I mentioning this? Because you got to realize it's very hard to put things in the classification scheme, because as we develop new techniques of identifying organisms such as the electron microscope, biological biochemistry, things like this, organisms may look alike, but they're not really related. So for now, we have these 6 kingdoms: plant, animal, fungi. By the way, I've been called a fungus. You know why? Because everyone says, gee, Dave, you're a real fun guy. Just thought I'd mention it. Then we have the protists. These are single-celled organisms mainly, and that includes algae and also seaweeds, by the way. By the way, I want to point out, despite the weather, come next May, when you go outside, you will all see weeds. Just thought I'd mention that. Okay. Anyway, so the protists. This is also the organisms that cause malaria, things like this, but we can talk about that later on. Then you have the 2 types of bacteria. The majority of bacteria that live in you and on you and in this room are the general bacteria, and then we have the other types called the archaebacteria, which are known as extremophilic or extremophiles, which means they live in very extreme conditions that will kill you, but not them. What's an extreme condition? Very salty, very hot, very cold, a lot of pressure. You understand? All these things. Too much hydrogen sulfide gas. That'll kill you, but these things love it because they discovered a new form of energy production called chemosynthesis, which means they get their energy from the oxidation of hydrogen sulfide gas. And the technical term, what oxidation means, it means the losing of electrons, okay? That's the chemical definition. And at the bottom of the ocean, they have these large organisms such as these giant tube worms and crabs and shrimp which live there, which utilize that process to gain energy. I should point out that the tube worms in particular don't have any stomachs. They have bacteria living on them, which gives them the food that they need through chemosynthesis. So for now, these are the 6 known kingdoms. And like I said, in probably 10 years, this will be changed. So here are pictures of the kingdoms. Of course, we have the fungus, the protist, demonstrated by this paramecium. We have a flower. We have the general bacteria, archaebacteria, and of course, animals. You see them? So these are the general kingdoms. And I want to point out, everything you see there, they all work together. Without them, we couldn't exist. And one thing you need oxygen, right? So where's the oxygen come from? The plants. But what makes the plants grow? See, bacteria and fungi help the plants grow. So we have all these things working together. Here's another chart of looking at the organisms. This is a different style picture, but nevertheless it shows more or less the same thing. Now, as for the total number of organisms, this is the closest we can get at the present time. We have plants now somewhere between 275,000, 300,000 known species. There are over 1 million animals. The protists, again, these include the single-celled organisms, such as the ones we study in biology class, parameciums. These are the little ciliated organisms. By the way, do you know what you call 2 meciums walking down the street? A paramecium. All right, anyway. One of my newly discovered organisms there. Okay, then, so again, the protists include seaweeds. And, well, how's the seaweed? It's a lot bigger than a protist than the paramecium. Well, you'll have to talk to the taxonomist about that. But because of the protist, by the way, will probably be changed in the near future if it isn't already, because this includes a whole conglomerate of organisms. When I was in high school, we only had 2 kingdoms, plants and animals. That was in the 50s. So what they did was they include things like fungi and bacteria in the plants, and then little amoebas, these single-celled little clear things that move very slowly by a process called cytoplasmic streaming as an animal. So it was eventually decided that we really can't classify them as animals and fungi as plants, because fungi don't have any chlorophyll, so they put them in their own kingdom. So again, this is going to change. This chart might be off, probably is now, but it doesn't matter, the approximate number. There's over 100,000 species of fungi. It's probably closer to 111,000. And bacteria, that might seem like a small number. It is at the present time. And that's because we can't go to places where a lot of bacteria are. Let me give you an example. I found out through my research that they went to Iceland and they found some bacteria 3,042 meters down underneath the earth. You know what that means? Put another way, it's almost 2 miles, or it's 3 kilometers. Isn't that something? And so they actually found them at that distance. So there's probably thousands more we don't know exist for the simple reason we can't get to them. You understand? And maybe down at the bottom of the ocean, underneath the soil that's down there, there's some other organisms that live there, such as fish or crabs or something like that, and they might have other bacteria in them, which of course we can't grow because you need a lot of pressure, and it's difficult to simulate the conditions of growth. Does that make sense? So there's probably a lot more. And then, so anyway, that's what we know now. And again, if you want to put this in tonnage, this is on the planet. We're all familiar with the term giga, such as in computers, gigabytes, right? Terabytes, all this stuff. Well, this shows you approximately how many tons and gigatons of all these organisms are together. A gigaton, again, is equal to 1 billion metric tons. And we have here plants, about 1.1 gigatons. And bacteria, look at that. It follows plants, roughly 500 gigatons. Protists, 10 gigatons. Fungi, 5. And animals, 2.5. Now, we know that animals weigh a lot, right, such as elephants and giraffes, but they depend on the plants. Everything depends on the plants. Most things do. Anyway, so plants is number one. And bacteria, even though they're quite small and they don't weigh much, but you put them all together, you see they weigh a lot. Now, I didn't make this up, okay? Now, there was a person called Costanza, and let me show you what he has done. He led a group, and I put that here, of, he wrote in Nature magazine, 1997, the value of the world's ecosystem services and natural capital, okay? I want to point out that this is very important. And at the time, this was written in 1997, this article came out, they predicted that the value of services was between 16 and 54 trillion dollars, okay? Remember, that was over 20 years ago, right? So now it could be double, I don't know, whatever the rate's going now. But it could be close to maybe 100 trillion, 80 trillion, it doesn't matter, whatever it is, it's a lot of money, okay? And at that time, the average was 33 trillion. Now, it's kind of difficult to figure this stuff out. I, myself, don't know exactly how they figured out. How do you value, you know, how much oxygen is worth from each individual tree, you see? But nevertheless, they came up with this, and this is a very good article, and see all the authors in it. And I think Robert Costanza was the main one, since he's number one up here. And so it's worth looking into. You could I got this online. You can get it. I found it in many places. Some places they want you to pay for it, but I didn't pay for this. I got it for free, and I think that's the way everything should be when it comes to research and things like this. And then what this does is it lists all of 17 nature services. And all these are done by the biodiversity that we're talking about. Now, I'm going to go into how this prevents extinction in a moment, but I just want to mention real briefly what it does. I don't expect you to write these down, but just in general, gas regulation, climate regulation, disturbance regulation. This means when you have storms and things like this, they repair themselves. If you know about Mount St. Helens that blew its top, I believe it was near Alaska somewhere, right? It blew its top, and yet it's coming back now, the land. It's green, trees are coming back, plants are coming back, so nature is very resilient. All of you have water, and you know, water clears itself eventually. Rivers do that, and a whole bunch of organizations actually, or bodies on the planet clean water unless we keep polluting it. That's the purpose of the soil, and the water goes down to get clean, you know, okay? Water supply, erosion control, soil formation, things like lichens, which belong to the fungal kingdom. They exist in both algae and fungi together, and they're very important. Nutrient cycling, such as decomposition, nitrogen fixation, a whole bunch of stuff like that. By the way, it's the bacteria that fix the nitrogen. They take atmospheric nitrogen from the air to make it useful for the plants. And then we have pollination. We know about bees. A lot of the foods you eat have to be pollinated, and of course, we have a problem with bees. You heard about that, right? So it's called colony collapse colony collapse disorder, and I forgot the exact name. Anyway, it's causing a problem. So bees are very important, and for pollination, and if they go, that affects the food supply. So I'm just giving you a few hints what's to come. Biological control, and like I said, let me tell you something. As I told you, my main field is environmental science, and in my environmental science class, we talk about pesticides and food and crops and things like this. And what we want to do is to control pests. We have a lot of pests out there, but the last thing you want to do is treat it with chemicals, because the chemicals are having a hazardous effect on humans. Does anybody know what one of the main effects of pesticides are doing, especially to young girls? They're causing puberty to come as young as 8 years old. Now, I'm not making this up. Why is that? because these chemicals, they have residues when they use chemicals, and then they decompose in the body and they act like estrogen. Therefore, they mimic estrogen. So these are called hormone mimics. You understand? So what it does, it reacts in the body as if it's like estrogen, like the hormone that they have. Therefore, it accelerates puberty. Okay? I had a woman in my class once. She was telling me her daughter reached puberty way before 12. So obviously, you know, it's not going to happen automatically. It has to do with pesticides, which are breaking down in the body. Therefore, nature did not make pesticides. Well, in a way, they did. They put natural pesticides in plants that you know, ward off other insects and other pests, such as barbs, you know, spines, and some chemicals and things like this. So that's a form of biological control. Also, the biological control is when you have an organism which eats the bad guy. You understand? And ladybugs is one that we use for pests. And there's a whole bunch of stuff, but of course we want to go into biological control, which is as natural as possible. Then we have refugia. These include, we see this now, where the geese come, okay? A bunch of geese come down, and it's refuge for them. You know, they always eat grass and they'll water, right? And then you have food production. Nobody's going to live in this room without the cafeteria would be closed if there's no food to serve, right? So where's the food come? It comes from the genetic resources supplied by nature. And then you have raw materials such as lumber and fuel and stuff like this. Unfortunately, oil, which is very bad. Genetic resources. Hey, you have all sorts of crops. Did you know, I think in the world there's something over 5,000 types of potatoes, okay? Where here in America, I don't see many more than maybe 10 at the most. Whereas in South America, I think Peru has the largest variety of 2,300 types of potatoes. And all this has to do with genetic resources, okay? And one thing about genetic resources, we have to keep the genetic resources, or else you're going to get into trouble, like what happened with the Irish potato famine, when they all grew what's known as a monoculture, one type of potato, and then that specific fungus, I don't expect you to know the name, it's called Phytophthora infestans, attacked that specific potato. But the trouble was, if they grew many different varieties of potatoes, various genes, they wouldn't have been wiped out because that fungus was species specific, you see, or variety specific. That's why biodiversity is important in everything. You understand? You need different genes for, like, even potatoes. You make something so simple as that, but you need a wide variety. One fungus will just hit one specific potato and not the others. Hence, this is why we practice polyculture, which means we grow a lot of crops, different crops at the same time. So one pest won't overrule everything, won't really multiply like crazy. And then we have recreation and cultural. These are more for humans. But anyway, I just thought I'd mention that to you. So this was a very important article that I ran across, and I'm using it. Okay, anyway, just thought I'd mention that. Now, I want to show you here, this is just another rundown of a healthy biodiversity. Provides all these things that you all take for granted. Hey, you're all drinking water, right? Now, most of it's clean. You know, here you go to the faucet, you go to the fountains, you get clean, unpolluted, diluted water. By the way, does anybody know how to dilute water in this class? You don't know? Simple, just add water to it. Just thought I'd mention. So anyway, a little extra there. All right, anyway, so if you read this, these are all the services. Now, everything you see there, or most things, are done by organisms. You see that? By our biodiversity. Where do you think soil comes from? Well, a good example, you ever hear of lichens? I think I mentioned that a few minutes ago. Lichens, you see these growing on trees. They're this crusty-like stuff growing on trees. And I'm going to tell you something. You won't see many in the cities because they're actually a good indicator of air pollution. The more air pollution, the less lichens you have. Now, I'm sure everybody here has been to Michigan. Have you been in the forests of Michigan, Wisconsin, right? Far away from a city. Have you seen all those trees are just loaded with lichens? I was there a few years ago. Man, it was a beautiful scene because you know the air is clean, right? Have any of you been there? Yeah, to the forest of Wisconsin, Michigan. I was there. It's beautiful. Go there. You see a lot of this crusty-like stuff growing on the trees, which means the air is wonderful out there. Well, it's better, I don't know. At least the lichens can survive it. Anyway, so these are the services up there. And like I say, you're all eating food. All that comes from the biodiversity. Nobody wants to eat rice every single day of the year, right? What would happen if they kill off everything but rice? You get pretty bored eating rice. See the point? So anyway, and here's some more. We get social benefits. We get research, education, recreation, tourism, cultural values, all those. Now, let's talk about threats. And unfortunately, we're seeing too many of these. And what I did was, I put together a list with a couple of little movies to show you, because I feel this is important. Now, I don't know if many of you think about this, but unfortunately, I think about these issues all the time for the simple reason that they're occurring. And one of the reasons they're occurring because it seems like the politicians don't care. It's all about the money. And this is something we all have to think about. Everything costs money, but yet money is destroying everything. You agree? You understand? Everything's money. Why don't we do this? Because it costs money. Why don't we do that? It costs money. If we take away, if we try to clean up the planet, then if we, let's say we have a factory that's polluting, if we spend a lot of money putting in anti-pollution devices, that costs money. You understand? They feel money is more important than anything. We got to have money. And so one of my pet peeves is money. Of course, we need money to live on, but I'm going to tell you one thing. You all know a few months ago, or last year, there was a satellite, I think it was named Juno. You know where it went? Where did Juno go? I think it went to the planet Pluto. It took 9 years to get there. What am I driving at? If we can know exactly when the satellite will hit Pluto, which we did, we can do something like getting rid of money so everybody will be more or less equal instead of having too many poor, too many rich, and destroying the planet. Does that make sense? The fact we have this technology, and if you saw those pictures here, I'm just going to show you this because this is fantastic. Let me just get this as an aside. I showed this yesterday too. Pluto, which is known as the farthest planet, or they downplay it. I'm going to have to make a more page because they're afraid to show Pluto here. Oh, there it is. Show Pluto. You should see those pictures. It took 9 years to get them, and they knew exactly when it would hit and everything. Look at that. This is probably one of the better ones, but anyway, we have some better ones here. There it is, okay? Took 9 years to get there, and it worked. You know what I'm going to do? I think I'll shut off the light, that way you can see a little better here. Is that okay? Can you still write? Yeah. Anyway, so look at the quality. Again, they had good cameras, and it went 9 years. And I believe they had a nuclear power plant on board. That's the only way they can get these satellites to run outside of the outer planets. I think Mars and beyond, because there's not enough sunlight. Like we have, you know, the space station has all these photovoltaic cells that keep it supplied with electricity because the sun's relatively close. But once you head past Mars, you have less sun, you're not able to collect all the sunlight to generate electricity, so these satellites have a little nuclear power plant on board. That's the only way you're going to get it to work. Something with the electric effect. And for more details on that, you'll have to ask the physicists. Anyway, so here are the threats. And what I have done, I have given you some examples, especially the top one called Nemeopsis ladii. This is one of the most incredible events that took place in 1982 in the Black Sea, yet I'm sure most of you never heard of it. Has anyone ever heard of that? Called ladies' comb jelly. Okay, I'm going to explain that. Anyway, I'll talk about that in a moment. And then we have habitat destruction, overhunting, overexploitation, climate change, disease, genetic pollution. I'm going to just talk about a few of these, such as terminator seeds. This is really an abomination what they're doing, and I think they're on the verge of being outlawed, and I'll explain that. Has anyone ever heard of the term terminator seed? Okay, this is another nasty thing that humans thought up with. It's all about greed, and I'll explain it to you. Hybridization, what that does is they take genes from certain organisms, okay, and they put them in others, and is that good? Well, I don't know. Let me ask you this. You eat cornflakes, right? But chances are, if you examine the cornflakes, they're transgenic, which means they're GMOs, genetically modified organisms, where they take one gene from one species, put it in another to enhance the effect of the cornflakes or whatever. They do this a lot, and we don't know what's going to happen, let's say, 50 years from now, if you keep eating these genetically modified foods. It's funny, you're eating an organism. That's what it's called, GMO, genetically modified organism. If you go to a restaurant, you got any organisms today? What do you got? You know, well, everything's an organism. Fish, plants, spaghetti, well, spaghetti comes from the wheat, that's an organism. Asparagus, whatever, chicken. And then, of course, climate change, that's a threat, that's obvious. And now, one of the stupid things we're doing, that's right, I call it stupid, we're trying to mutate mosquitoes so they won't bite us. And what they else want to do, they want to prevent mosquitoes from being born. And if you get rid of mosquitoes, guess what? You could probably kiss the planet's ecosystems goodbye, okay? Now, most people don't like mosquitoes because they bite. But ask yourself, why are they here in the first place? And, well, one of the reasons is they act as a good food source for organisms like bats, okay? Now, what do bats do for the planet? Well, they actually plant trees. Did you know that bats are one of the most important organisms on the planet? Because they eat fruit and then they drop the seeds replant themselves. I'm going to tell you another fact. There's roughly 4,000 mammals species left alive on the planet. 20% of those, or roughly 800, are bat species. Bet you didn't know that either. So bats play an important part. As a matter of fact, there's an organization called Bat Conservation International, which is trying to preserve bats, because unfortunately bats are being hunted for food, especially in Asia and Indonesia and places like that. So it's very important. Now, bats not only eat fruit, but they eat mosquitoes. Birds eat mosquitoes. Dragonflies eat mosquitoes. So if we destroy mosquitoes, we're going to be in trouble. You understand? Just because they bite doesn't mean they're not bad. Okay? They're here for a purpose. Just want you to know that. And as a matter of fact, there was a fellow named Harlan Ellison. He was a science writer, and he made the beautiful statement: the two most abundant elements in the universe are hydrogen and stupidity. And unfortunately, he's correct. Anyway, now, I'm going to show you first a good example of good biodiversity, okay? And then I'm going to get into the bad stuff and really astound you with some fantastic facts, which is really so ridiculous that they exist that, I mean, I just got to share it with you. Anyway, what you see here is the ecosystem of soils, okay? Now, these are all the bugs and bacteria and fungus and stuff that live in soils. Why do they live there? To bother you? No, they serve a function, okay? Every organism that we see there has a niche in life. What is a niche? A niche is a role in life. They all have a niche. What is my niche? Very simple. My niche in life is telling you about niches. Anyway, yeah, that was a good one. Let's hear it. Okay, anyway. Now, so here we see all these bugs. You got worms and beetles and a whole bunch of stuff. Fungi and snails and bacteria. Now, here we see actual photos of those. These are the things you're going to find in soil. They're very important. Worms are incredibly important. And by the way, when you see a lot of worms after a rain, especially on the sidewalk, the rain is actually causing them to drown because they breathe through their skin. That's why you're going to see a lot of worms crawling on the sidewalk after a rain, especially a heavy rain, because they'll drown. So again, they breathe through their skin. And anyway, that's why you see them there. But anyway, in the soil, I keep mentioning anyway too many times, we have all these organisms. These are mites, these are fungi. Here we have a tardigrade, better known as a water bear. These things, by the way, are really fantastic. They can withstand desiccation and then regenerate themselves. Desiccation means drying. As a matter of fact, I think they brought these up in space and they can even withstand space without any protection. And then they come back, you can regenerate them to live. So they're pretty cool. They're known as tardigrades, and the common name is water bear. They're kind of microscopic arthropods related to insects. They're quite interesting. And their eggs, they have little flagellum. The eggs are flagellated. It's interesting little creatures there. Yeah, this looks like a flagellated organism. Here we have fungal strands. So all these play a role in maintaining the soil. Okay, we also have earthworms which aerate the soil. So all these organisms, again, have a niche in life. Now, here we see byproducts of cattle. Let's talk about cattle. Okay, we know we have a lot of cows out there. By the way, someone asked me a question. You know why cows have bells? The answer is because their horns don't work. That's what I mentioned. All right, anyway, there's another story about cows I'll tell you later. Anyway, so let's read what we have here, and if we look at all these organisms, just think, if one of these types disappears, how we're going to be in trouble. You understand? Here we have cattle waste. Cattle waste feeds the soil that nourish the crops. Crops, as well as yielding grain, also yield straw. Straw provides organic matter and fodder. Okay? Crops are therefore food sources for humans and animals. Okay? Soil organisms also benefit from crops. Bacteria feed on the cellulose fibers of straw that farmers return to the soil. Amoebas feed on the bacteria, making lignite fibers available for uptake by plants. Algae provide organic matter that serve as natural fixers, and in this case, serve as nitrogen fixers. And what we mean by that, these are actually blue-green algae, better known as the cyanobacteria, and what they do is, in fact, people buy them, farmers buy them to mix in the soil, and they fix the nitrogen. What they mean by fixing nitrogen means it incorporates it into a chemical called either ammonium or nitrates. And these are the fertilizers you need for plants. Hey, do any of you go to the nursery and buy fertilizers? Right? Nobody? Oh, you do. What do you get? Nitrogen, potassium, phosphorus? Well, of course, you're not getting nitrogen gas, but you're getting nitrogen in the form of nitrates. That's the usable form. You know, 78.09% of the air in this room is nitrogen, with roughly 20.98% is oxygen. Okay, so the majority of the air in an unpolluted atmosphere is nitrogen. So, of course, you don't feel it, but and the oxygen is 20.94%. Nitrogen, oxygen is 20.9%, nitrogen is 70.08%, and then we have argon gas and carbon dioxide. This makes up, all these four together make up over 99% of the air in this room. So, we need that. So the algae, actually nostoc is an example of a blue-green algae which fixes the nitrogen. Then we have rodents, such as mice, things like this. They're very important. They bore under the fields. They aerate the soil and improve the water holding capacity of the soil. So you see, all these are very important. If we destroy even one part of this chain, things are going to go haywire. You understand? That's why we have to be very careful. And one of the things that do this, of course, are pesticides. So pesticides are very bad. Now, by the way, I just want to mention something to you. That word organic, I believe that's a bad word. Now, essentially what organic means, coming from life, which literally means when we talk about organic chemistry, that means chemistry containing carbon and covalent linkage. You know, things like sugar on your table, black pepper, even the plastic in this room, and the wood. This is all organic because it contains carbon and covalent linkage. But when you go to a store, you know what it means. It means it does not contain pesticides, things like this. But the irony of the thing is that when you're talking about carbon and covalent linkage, most pesticides are organic, you see? So it's kind of a funny term. Get the idea? But anyway, I just want to share that with you. I'm very opinionated. And as I tell my students, if I want their opinion, I'll give it to them. All right, anyway. Now, so then we have spiders and centipedes, and insects grind organic matter from the surface of the soil and leave behind enriched droppings. I mean, all these organisms have a function. Then we have earthworms, and by the way, there was a book called, what was it called? life on Earth, something like that. I got it at home. Oh, earth matter, something like that, where earthworms are number one of all the animals he speaks about, which help the planet function. Okay? So this is very important. The earthworm, as it says here, is a natural tractor, fertilizer factory, and dam combined. So you got to hug an earthworm next time you see one. All right. Now, what I'm going to do is just give you some more brief examples. I don't know if anybody knows this term, the oxygen sag curve. And I want to point out, why am I emphasizing aquatic environments? Because my main field is, in addition to the environment, it's marine science. Okay? So, I deal a lot with water, and of course you all do because you got to drink it. Anyway, this is a good example of biodiversity. Let's say you have a river. Okay? Now, a river will eventually clean itself out. Okay? Let's say you have a sewage outfall pipe there, okay, in the river. Above the sewage outfall, you have something called the clean zone. Okay? So what's happening? The clean zone, look what you see there. You see a huge biodiversity. You see different species of fish, fly larvae, algae, things like this. So, what you have here, we're going to mention two terms. Let's see if we have any chart here. Yes, we do. Okay. I want to point this out. We have something called diversity versus density. This is very important. Now, what do we mean by this? Okay. A healthy environment contains a large biodiversity here. Biodiversity with low density, which means you have a lot of different organisms here, but not an incredible number of each one. You understand? So, you have a high biodiversity, low density. You understand that concept? Now, as we go down the river, notice we have these two curves here. I'll just do it this way since I don't have a yardstick. This curve here represents the oxygen. Hence it's called the oxygen sag curve, because if you would measure the oxygen in parts per million using a probe now, they used to use chemicals, now they use a probe, an electrode. You stick in, you're going to get low oxygen. As the water flows, the oxygen is going to go up again. This other line represents something called the BOD, biochemical oxygen demand. And that means it's expressed in the number of milligrams oxygen per liter of water needed to gobble up the pollutants, okay? And so at the very top, when we have the oxygen very low, we have a relatively high BOD. A high BOD is bad. A low BOD is good. When water enters a sewage treatment plant, it has a very high BOD. When it leaves the sewage treatment plant, a good sewage treatment plant removes up to 95% of the BOD. And anyway, so this oxygen curve, as we go down the river, we have first the clean zone, then we have the zone where, let's say, the sewage is. That's called the decomposition zone. Notice we're getting a smaller number of biodiversity, okay? We're getting smaller. Then, as we keep going down, we're going to hit the septic zone, where we only have two major types of organisms, okay? You may have worms and bacteria, but you're going to have a large density, you understand? And low biodiversity. That's the difference. The higher the biodiversity you have, the cleaner the water. Does that make sense? So then, as the river moves, eventually, assuming you stop adding the sewage or garbage, whatever you're polluting it with, as it goes down, it's going to increase the oxygen again. So this is why this is called the oxygen sag curve, if you remember. And again, what's the distance? This is all relative. The distance or time depends, first of all, how much pollution you have, how fast the river is flowing, how many organisms are in there. You understand? It varies. But this is what's going on. Eventually, you're going to get a recovery zone where the good stuff is coming back, and then eventually you'll hit the clean water zone where, again, you have a high biodiversity, low density. Okay? Now, okay, here we have a problem. Who can tell me what they see there? Go on, what do you see? I don't think it's Photoshop. What's that big thing on the left? It's a jellyfish. Weighs over 400 pounds. That's a diver. Now you might say this is Photoshop. Whatever the case, I don't believe it is, but it could be. But nevertheless, this is a serious problem that we're seeing now off the coast of Japan. Well, what do you see there? That's a nice jellyfish. Pretty big. You don't want to go swimming with him, right? All right. Why are these jellyfish getting so big? You heard about the jellyfish invasion of the planet, the oceans? Why? Anyone know why? Hey, Marcus, any idea?
Probably eating a lot.
Yes, but why are they eating a lot? That's the question. Why are they eating a lot? Okay. This is what you get when you destroy biodiversity. I'll tell you why they're getting so big. The fishing industry. How do we fish these days? Using ships, giant fishing ships, a lot of nets, okay? How do they know where the fish are? They use satellites, right? So what does that mean? The fish don't have a chance. You got that? Right? They don't have a chance. We have all these satellites up there, so they're emptying out the oceans of the fish. Now, here's the problem. What do fish eat? They eat a lot of eggs, stuff like this, right? Other than plankton, which I'll get to in a moment. Why do we have so many large jellyfish? Because normally the fish would eat the eggs of the jellyfish, right? What happens if you kill off the fish? The jellyfish are going to start multiplying and eat whatever they can, and they go non-stop. You see that? They did experiments. These things just eat and eat and eat, and they'll grow and grow and grow. That's why they get big, because we've overfished the ocean. You understand? When you take away the biodiversity, we're causing these things to bloom. And what's going to happen when they start blooming? They're going to eat the other little plankton, which are little organisms in the water that I'll mention about earlier. You understand? So I hope you get the idea of this. Yeah, let's see what's going on there with this. Here we see a good example. It says giant jellyfish are taking over parts of the world's oceans as overfishing and other human activities open windows of opportunity for them to prosper, say researchers. Jellyfish are normally kept in check by fish, which eat the small jellyfish and compete for jellyfish food, such as zooplankton, which I'll show you some pictures in a moment. But with overfishing, jellyfish numbers are increasing, and then these things don't know when to stop. You understand? They don't have much brain power, okay? I think they can't tell when they're full, all right? Now, I'm going to show you this. This is one of the most incredible stories ever. I first ran across this. There's a book put out by the World Watch environmental group called Life Out of Bounds. And this took place in the Black Sea in 1982. All right, let me show you something. I'm going to read this to you. And that has to do with this organism called the lady's comb jelly. Has anyone here in this room ever heard of these things? All right. Suppose I told you, get a load of this. I'm going to read it direct from the book. Let's see here. I also have it written there. By late 1988, a single cubic meter of Black Sea water could contain as many as 500 of these little jellies. If all the jellyfish could have been hauled out of the sea that fall, that November area, and weighed, you know what? The take would have come between 900 million and 1 billion tons. But here's the best part. Remember, between 900 million and 1 billion tons. At least, you ready for this? 10 times the total fishery catch that year. You see that? So, if they weighed all of these together, they would weigh more than 10 times the total fish together, including tuna and what else they got, you know, tuna, cod, or whatever they have. Okay? Now let me show you this. I'll play this organism for you. Anyway, so pretty cool, this stuff. Actually, they had an exhibit here at the aquarium of these actual organisms last year. So let's see what this says. Here, I'll play it for you for a minute. best I can do. Take a look. That's what they look like. By the way, these belong to a different phylum than the regular jellyfish. The jellyfish belong to the phylum Cnidaria, beginning, it's spelled C with the letter C-N-I-D-A-R-I-A. These belong to a different phylum called Ctenophora. I'll spell it. And yet, the Ctenophora begins with the letter C, even though we don't pronounce the C. Ctenophores. Oh, Ctenophora. Ctenophora. Yeah. Also, easier known as 350s. Right? Better known as 350s. Why 350? 10 to 4. Get it? 10 to 4. Ctenophoras. Okay. Just thought I'd show you that. I learned that a long time ago. So, they're quite interesting little critters. All right. Let's see. Next. All right. Now, let's see the term zooplankton. What are they? All right. Let me show you pictures. You see these little organisms? These are called zooplankton and phytoplankton. Have any of you ever heard of these terms before? Yeah. Good. You know. So, phytoplankton. The word phyto means plant. Okay? Plankton are these free-floating organisms. See that? That go with the flow. All right. So here we see both a mixture. We have these little animals. The main zooplankton, zoo comes from the word zoo, which means animals. Planktonic means free-floating, are things called copepods. This is by far the most abundant animal on the planet. Yet I'm sure no one here has ever seen them. I worked with these a lot. I used to live in Israel for 5 years. I did work on the Sea of Galilee there, and we found a lot of copepods. My main field there was working with the algae, the plants, but I learned a lot about copepods. These are the most abundant animal on the world. They're very small. Well, some you can barely make out with the naked eye. They're about the third the size of a pencil dot. But some are about an inch. These are parasitic on whales and things like this. But nevertheless, these things are little animals, and then they eat the phytoplankton, which are like the vegetables of the sea, the little plant things. You see that? Now, so we have here the phytoplankton and the zooplankton. So everything's written there, like it says, phytoplankton. These are the little microscopic plant-like organisms called algae, and the zooplankton, the little animals that eat the phytoplankton. Now, here comes something real interesting. Right. Here we see three things. I want to ask you a question. There's a relationship between these organisms. Up here, we see the phytoplankton. Anybody know the names of these little shrimp? They're called krill. Anybody know that? Krill? Okay, and these are whales. Okay, there is a theory out. Now, did you know that if this theory is correct, we're going to be in trouble? If we kill off all the whales, there goes the oxygen supply of the planet. What's the relationship? Anybody ever hear that? Good, what is it?
Well, the krill keep track of, they eat the phytoplankton and algae make oxygen. Most of the oxygen comes from...
So what's going to happen if you kill off the whale?
There's going to be there's a high density of krill eating the algae.
Exactly. So they're going to eat themselves out of business, so to speak. And they predict, or at least they say, they think 40% of the world's oxygen comes from the oceans, you see? From the photosynthesis of the phytoplankton. You know what that means about the whales? Since the whales eat shrimp, means they don't keep kosher. Anyway, you get the idea. All right, so here we see the krill. Now, guess what I brought? Yes. When I was in Israel, I went to an old ma and pa store. Guess what I bought? A can of krill. See? I never opened it. I don't intend to. Look at that.
Tough mud.
Nice, huh? Real krill. Here it is. I bought it many years ago. It was over 20 years ago I had this can. I'm not even going to attempt to read it. But anyway, it comes in this little box. I guess you could say if I threw this at you, I will krill you. Anyway, so you get the idea. So here's the krill. It's in this little jar. So if anybody wants to see it, we'll see it. Can. Anyway, then there's something else. I ran across a game called krill, a whale of a game, based on these organisms. And anyway, it's quite interesting. But anyway, so the krill, look at that. Can you imagine playing a game of krill? That means whoever thought of it knew these things are important. Now, guess what they were thinking? They would use krill to feed the humans. Does that make sense? Why not? They feed the whales. You see it? Okay, so here's the krill. Isn't that interesting? I just saw it there, figured, hey, might as well grab it. I never saw krill in the store before. I don't think Jewel sells krill. But anyway, all right. So, okay, now, I want to mention one more thing. Again, I'm telling you, the human race is not so bright. We have something called the terminator seeds. Who knows what they are? Anybody ever hear? No? Yeah, what are they?
So the seeds, like, they're made so they can't be regrown, and they don't produce other seeds.
Exactly. And why do they do that, the companies that make them?
So they can make more money.
More
Exactly.
seeds.
So here, let me tell you what that means. Very good. Let's take corn, for instance. Hey, how do farmers get enough seed to grow their crops? Again, well, they grow the crops, they sell most of it, but they save some to regrow for the following year, right? So let's say you want to grow corn. So you raise the corn, you keep some for yourself to sell, you know, you take off the corn and grow it, right? And then you sell the rest of it. And you assume the corn you grow will regrow, right? But I think it's Monsanto or Cargill, the seed companies, they genetically modified this. So guess what? The farmer cannot do that. You can't resave the corn and grow it. It won't grow. They call that suicide seeds. It will not germinate or grow. That's pretty nasty, isn't it? And what you're doing with this case, you're destroying the wild varieties of corn. Do you see that? If these greedy companies, it's like extortion. You know, this is extortion. You got to buy our seed, or else you're not going to get any seed. You see? So anyway, this is what they do. And again, it's amazing how they come up with these things. These are all evil. You understand? It's all about the you-know-what. What's it about? Money. Exactly. That's why, you know, I'm very sarcastic, but we have to get rid of money. And I don't know how we can do it. But let me ask you this. You all agree it's not really fair for the poor. Many of them have no means of getting out of it, right? In many cases, it's not their fault. You understand? They're just born in poverty, right? And then you have the super rich, which are born rich. And, you know, you could call it luck or whatever, but, you know, I've known some rich. I don't think they're very nice guys, especially the ones in Washington. It's the opposite of nice, but I won't go into politics. You know, I like to joke around a lot, but I don't like political jokes. Do you know why? The answer is simple, because too many get elected. Anyway, now, all right, so, but, you know, maybe we can give another talk about how we can get rid of money and make everybody equal. If you want to buy something, you can buy it, you know? I don't know the answer to that. People think I'm crazy by even talking about it. But anyway, I don't know. All right, so the Terminator seed is actually one of the good examples of a threat to biodiversity. You see that? Now, what about seeds? Are you all aware that Norway, I believe it's Norway, has a seed bank? Why'd they put it up there in Norway? Because it's cold up there. But now, they got a little problem. It's called climate change, you see? And that might make Norway not so cold anymore. You understand? So anyway, I don't know all the answers. I want to read you something now before I finish. I'm going fast here. Just by chance, I was given a number of science magazines the other day, and I was looking through them. And they range from 2005 to 2008, you know, which is more than 10 years ago. And each issue, before I give them away, we have a desk at the other campus, with a table where you put freebies, you know, books and stuff you want to get rid of. Let people use them, you know, because I can't. In fact, I tear out the information. I'm looking for information that I can use. And this is an editorial in the April 2005 2005 issue. That's exactly 13 years ago, right? It says 15 April. That's pretty close, yes? Exactly 15, what is it, 13 years and 3 days ago, right? Okay, let me read this to you. It said, loss of habitat, invasive species, global warming, pollution, overexploitation, disease, and perhaps other unidentified stressors present a massive threat to global biodiversity. The world's ecosystems provide services whose estimated value is in the trillions of dollars annually, okay? The assessment found that about 60% of the ecosystem services that support life are being degraded or used unsustainability. So, speaking of sustainability, I want to give credit to this college for a very simple reason. We have a woman who works here by the name of Deborah Kutzka. She has a very interesting position called sustainability expert. I'm glad this college has one. Now, I teach at a number of colleges, and I've never heard of that. So that means Oakton is one of the premier colleges, I'd say, in the world. We even have a position like that. You all agree? Right? And what she did was, she was responsible for, or at least helped, put an electric charger out there by the new science building. And if you have a Nissan or some other car that runs on electric like I do, you can charge it for free. Okay? Just want to let you know. Now, I myself drive 2 cars. Why do I drive? Well, I drive 3 things. I drive an Echo that I bought in 2004. That was the best car I could get. It's a 5-speed. I get 40 miles a gallon. And then I decided, with all this talk about climate change and stuff, I tried to buy a used Nissan Leaf, which I did. I bought that last year. And I spew out more carbon dioxide than that does. I think that's pretty neat. And the third thing I drive my students crazy with my jokes. So anyway, now, but I try to practice what I preach. Okay, so I think I've said enough. Are there any questions, comments, complaints, anything? Any questions? None? All right, so what I want you all to do is go out and save the world. Got it? Okay. Thank you for coming. I have 2 of my students here, these 2 young guys over there, they're in my class. I have here, this is called Django. I know I forgot something. This is a game where you pull out the parts and see if it falls, right? You aware of that?
Yeah.
Think of this as the planet Earth with all its organisms and ecosystems. What happens, let's suppose I pull this out. What's happening to this structure? It's getting
Come on,
weaker,
staple.
right? And if I pull the top, it's not weak. But if I pull this one out, every one I pull out, it's weakening the structure, right? So think of each wooden block as an organism, right? That we need, either bacteria, animals, plants, whatever, fungi, right? What's going to happen if we pull half out? Boom, the whole thing's going to collapse, right? Especially if we do it from the bottom. You all agree? So I forgot to show you that. I got carried away here. Good. Now I got that. Thank you.